What's up guys, JayzTwoCents here, and I'm gonna bring you a talking head about a topic that seems to just trigger people all over the place and start so many different arguments and fanboys and enthusiasts alike, and that is AMD versus Intel. A topic we've covered a few times on this channel over the years, but is probably more relevant now than ever, because for the first time ever, it's becoming difficult to make that choice because there is so much competition and both have such kind of different ideologies to offer. I find myself seeing a lot of people confused on what to buy. So today I'm gonna try and arm you with some information and some things to think about when making your decision, hopefully making you a smarter buyer. The new Z10 gaming keyboard from EVGA features a built-in 2-port USB hub, volume slider, 3-step adjustable wrist rest, and an onboard LCD display allowing you to keep track of your PC's PXOC stats, core clock, and more. Find out everything that the Z10 gaming keyboard can do by heading to evga.com. So this is one of those talking head videos that a lot of you really seem to enjoy, so feel free to minimize it and play your own music because I'm not going to, I don't want to burn my face into your screen. You don't want that image burned on your screen. Trust me, nobody wants that. Before we can kind of move forward, we need a quick history lesson. We're gonna make this very, very brief. But if we go back to the FX era, when about 2011, when the AMD FX processor launched, it was not exactly as, wasn't as Intel destroying as people were hoping. It looked like it was, on paper, it was going to do really good because it had, the FX 8120 and the 8150 had 8 cores, and it was better than anything Intel had offering on the mainstream platform. And unfortunately, it just did not really hold water. And it gave you a very good performance to dollar, ratio, but it just did not compete or really give the uppercut to Intel people had hoped. And the problem was, as it progressed, it didn't really improve that much. They did some small improvements to core clock and stuff like that, and it just didn't really move forward. And the problem was Intel was making fairly decent jumps generation per generation. In fact, the last time AMD had actually truly competed with Intel and beaten Intel in benchmarks and other types of scenarios was all the way back in the Athlon era in the mid to early 2000s. So you can kind of see how long ago that was. And that's how long we were dealing with Intel being top dog. That's why so many people were hoping AMD was going to topple Intel, because that could trigger competition in the space, which would bring performance up and cost down, which unfortunately didn't really happen with the FX CPU. Now fast forward about 6 years to 2017, the highly anticipated and awaited Zen architecture, now known as Ryzen, launched. And a lot of people were pretty leery simply because of what happened with the FX launch. A lot of people just didn't know what to expect with AMD. AMD had a lot of hype train and unfortunately a lot of derailments in launches in past. So a lot of people were just kind of concerned on what was really going to be the real story regarding a brand new x86 architecture that was built from the ground up. Well, spoiler alert guys, Zen architecture did just exactly what people were hoping it would do. It shook up the CPU industry and it shook Intel a little bit because Intel started improving on their CPUs, something that they hadn't really been doing over the last several years simply because there was no competition. So now here we are in 2018 with the second generation Ryzen launched, and Intel really had just kind of shown all of their cards by pulling in Coffee Lake and other CPUs into 2017 and 2018 that weren't even supposed to launch until later on this year. So that means AMD did exactly what we were hoping. It shook Intel enough to start the CPU war once again. Now, one of the things that's really unique about 2018 is for the first time, I think just about ever, we actually have a mainstream and extreme platform for both offerings. AMD always competed in the mainstream market, but didn't really have its extreme market. Well, now we've got the X399 and X499 stuff coming out, which is going to obviously compete with X299 from Intel and whatever the successor for that is going to be, which is going to be your very highly multi-threaded, tons of cores. We're talking, Intel's got its 18 core, the 7980XE, so it's 18 cores, 36 threads. You've got the 1950X from AMD, which is again the X399, 16 core, 32 thread CPU, things that typically only existed in the server space is now being offered to standard consumers. And then you got your mainstream, which is pretty much something that a lot of people are going to fall in that category. And that's where the true competition really is, because AMD has got their 2700X now sort of replacing the 1800X. Now I'm pretty confident that I could set up a blind taste test with something like a 2700X or an 8700K and have someone come in and kind of work on the computer and try and determine if it was AMD or Intel, I'm pretty confident that someone would have a hard time doing that. One of the things that's always kind of really differentiated CPUs on the Intel side was the number of PCIe lanes, which was a very curious way of kind of limiting its stack, where over time you would see the gimping of PCIe lanes for the same number of cores. And let me explain. The 5960X, which was an 8-core, 16-thread CPU, had 40 PCIe lanes. But if you fast forward to the i7-7820X, you'll find it's also an 8-core, 16-thread CPU on the X299 platform, but they shaved the PCIe lanes from 40 to 28. So it's one of those things it's always kind of made people wonder why Intel is choosing the PCIe lanes and choosing to chop those over anything else. Now, one of the things that you get on the AMD side of things is on the X399 platform, you get more PCIe lanes and you get them on all of the CPUs. So the X399 AMD series and the X299 Intel series is definitely a good option for power users because of its available core count. It's got very fast core speed, the amount of PCIe lanes available on both platforms, although asterisk AMD gives you 60 on all of their CPUs. It makes sense for people who have very heavy multi-threaded workloads, live streaming, video encoding, rendering, lots of background tasks, virtual machines, servers, it all would make more sense on that platform. Now, the mainstream platform, I feel, is where a lot of the competition is and where a lot of you as viewers are gonna fall into that category. You can still video edit on both platforms, the X370 from AMD and the Z270 from Intel. You can kind of see what AMD was doing here, right? They were always one-upping the Intel number because, higher number is better. A little bit trolly, but I think it was really kind of funny the way they went about that. But anyway, I digress. So now you've got the mainstream offering, obviously, on both sides. So the current mainstream on Intel is the Z370. You'll find like the 8700K, 6-core, 12-thread, the 8700, 8600K, and then you've got the AMD mainstream, which is the current just released X470 for 2nd-gen Ryzen, and you'll find the 2700X, 2600X, and that range of CPU there. But I tell you right now, if I was, and this is where I'm sure it's hard as buyers, if I was to do a blind taste test and say to the user, have a gauntlet of tasks for them to do, something like Cinebench, some gaming, some video rendering, and I didn't tell them what platform they were on, I think most people would be hard pressed to actually identify what platform they're on, AMD or Intel, just based on day-to-day use case scenarios. Gaming, video rendering, it's all such a good experience on both platforms. Now in Intel, you often get a higher core speed. Intel has definitely been pulling out more megahertz out of their CPUs. The 8700K can overclock to 5 gigahertz and beyond very easily. The problem is Intel is now the one that tends to run really hot because they chose to stop soldering their CPU, their heat spreaders on top of their die, which means that there's not as good of a heat transfer as there used to be. AMD has decided to solder all of their CPUs because they've heard the complaints people have about Intel. So you tend to get a little bit better temperature on AMD, which is kind of funny. It's a role reversal of the typical jokes, AMD space heaters, which the FX series was kind of referred to as. But it shows just how much things have changed. Now, my recommendation for most people would be, if you're an everyday average user and you're just playing your games and you want to maybe make a YouTube video here and there, the Ryzen platform is going to offer you a lot more for your money. You're going to get more cores than you can get on Intel for the same amount of money. It's overclockable. It's very easy to overclock, actually. And it is cheaper overall than Intel and giving you what I feel is a better user experience for the money. But if you're the kind of person who's looking for IPC, you have programs and stuff that you're running like Adobe, Photoshop, which take huge advantage of the actual core speed, then Intel might be the way to go for you. You sacrifice a couple of cores, but you're able to get way more IPC out of those cores, which some programs take advantage of. My guess, though, is if you're watching this video and you already know that you need that, you probably have already made your decision anyway, and you're just curious as to what it is I'm going to say. Gaming is an interesting topic, though, when it comes to CPUs, because we're starting to see more and more developers actually coding for the multi-core experience. Back in the day, most of the multi-core CPUs would just have 1 or 2 cores under load and it would bounce all around, where now we're actually seeing a very split up and level core usage experience where they're dividing that usage amongst cores that are available. It only took 12 years or so for it to actually become kind of the norm. But now that it is the norm, we're seeing where having multi-core CPUs in games that are rendering large worlds. Obviously, as the CPUs have moved forward with technology, the developers are able to give you a interesting gaming experience now where you can render these massive sandbox worlds and they don't have to, really worry about the power available to it with these single thread, single core CPUs. So now we're starting to actually see gaming take advantage of these number of cores. I mean, PUBG is one of those that is known to be pretty intensive on your CPU. World of Warcraft has always been CPU intensive. So now you can see gains by actually going with a higher end CPU as a gamer. One thing that's also making it harder is the fact that motherboard manufacturers, and yes, I'm going to throw them under the bus, motherboard manufacturers were very known for cheaping out on their AMD motherboards versus their Intel counterparts, even if they shared the same name. Even when the first generation Ryzen came out, I think motherboard manufacturers kind of saved cost and didn't build them to the same robust standards as the Intel counterparts because we hadn't really seen how successful Ryzen was going to be yet. But now you can take an Intel motherboard and an AMD motherboard and they both feel like they are just these beefy, bricky behemoths of motherboards from the top tier all the way down. The quality between AMD and Intel seems to match, in my opinion, for like the first time ever. So the point I think I'm getting at here is in 2018, you're really hard pressed to make a bad choice. You could easily overspend by buying a higher end CPU than you really need, but that's why there are tiers and platforms for consumers. Now here in the studio, we've got basically every platform up and running at all times. We've got Ryzen, we've got Intel 8700K, we've got a 7960X, which is 16 core, 32 thread. We've got a Ryzen Threadripper 1920X on an X399. We've got some older Ryzen stuff. I mean, for the first time ever moving between them, I don't feel a difference in general usage, which is a great thing. The only time you can tell a difference on any of these platforms is obviously we do video rendering here, is when you hit encode, the time that it shows is the only way you can tell which platform you're on, and even those scale very, very close. So guys, this has just been a little bit of a talking video kind of telling you where we are here in 2018 when it comes to CPUs. If you haven't been following any of this, then you're probably more confused than when you started. But it's definitely worth keeping your ear to the ground because Computex is coming next month. It's in June, and that is ground zero for all things computer technology. We are going to be seeing some new offerings, obviously from AMD and Intel, I'm going to assume. Who knows what it's going to be? It feels like both companies have kind of shown all their cards, so I don't really know what could come next. But they got to be showing something. It's the world stage for CPU technology. Whether it's going to be GPUs or CPUs, I have no idea. So anyway, guys, I'm gonna go. If you think I've missed something in this conversation, you just wanna add something, do it cordially. Try and make an educated statement down below. Don't just do the fanboy, AMD sucks, Intel sucks, because unfortunately the forums are full of all of that, and you've gotta put together a more compelling and intellectual argument than blah, blah, blah sucks. It's okay, I know you guys are gonna do it anyway. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Give me a follow on Twitter if you guys wanna talk about this a little bit more in depth, or I'll just see you guys in the next one.